So, uh, oh, good. Okay, great. So I've been to Brazil probably 4 or 5 times, and I still speak no Portuguese, so I'm sorry. So bear with me, right? So what I want to talk to you guys today about was the idea of protecting operational technology, SCADA infrastructure from IT risks. And this has been something that's been in the back of my mind since about right before I graduated from college in 2008. And it's been something that I've been passionate about, and it's kind of where my career, I feel, is heading, and it's something I'm still very strong about. So who am I? So I'm Shad Harris. I assume there was some introduction there. I couldn't quite understand it. But at the same time, currently I'm a senior subject matter expert for 2 products. Security analytics, which we'll talk about today, as well as the SSL visibility platform, which is our SSL decryption tool that we leverage for a lot of our customers. Prior to Symantec, I was with Blue Coat, and if you're familiar with Blue Coat, they purchased Solera Networks, which is where the security analytics platform actually came from. And then prior to that, I was actually a customer at one point of Solera, Blue Coat, and Symantec at the Idaho National Laboratory. So I kind of rolled up into all of those. At my role at the Idaho National Laboratory, I was a cybersecurity analyst. So I was responsible for day-to-day operations between anywhere from 3,500 to 4,500 different endpoints and different protocol measures, right? So I managed the IDS, the firewalls, our sandboxing technology at the time. A lot of different solutions were used at the Idaho National Lab. They had a lot of money, or a lot of budget, I'll say, for tools. So I got to experience a lot of different great tools. What that gave me was some really interesting experience between nuclear research, chemical research, energy research, SCADA, and then your traditional cybersecurity network, right? We had a classified network. We have all sorts of information at the Idaho National Laboratory that we protected on a daily basis. But one of my favorite things that I got to do occasionally was work alongside the Department of Homeland Security research team, because they got to do some cool stuff, right? They got to do a lot of really cool experiments. They needed help setting up the networks. I am tall, so I got to put the high servers in the racks, and so they let me do that for them. But alongside with that, one of the first demonstrations I was privy to was actually the Aurora vulnerability, which was taken out at Idaho National Lab. So that was something that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Why that shaped my career and my kind of thought process is pretty simple, really. I have a couple examples that we'll get to, but it's the idea that when you blend operational technology with information technology, you have a unique situation in which usually, and sometimes always, is only one of those tools was designed with security in mind, right? Very rarely do you see both the operational technology being secured as well as the IT. I have an example I'll give later about how I found out that some of the resources that I use for SCADA industrial control are actually woefully unprepared, so that's a problem. The next reason I'm pretty passionate about this was probably the idea, and this was something we were talking about yesterday, is there's real world implications to what happens, right? It's no longer, my Facebook account got locked out, or I spammed all my friends, or they took money out of my bank account, those kind of things. We're talking about loss of life, right? We can turn off electricity in the winter, and I guess in Brazil the winter's not that bad, but where I'm from, that could mean loss of life, right? And you can open a dam or mix chemicals together that shouldn't be mixed together and cause huge problems. And so that's something that's always in the back of my mind, is with this latest push to get everything connected and get everybody using smart doorbells and smart garages and smart everything, right? Smart light switches. How far are we pushing it if we're not keeping security in mind, right? So the next kind of topic is just industrial, in the sense that SCADA experts are hard to find, right? I actually had a heck of a time finding one to even interview so that I could talk. I ended up not finding one because the one that told me he was an expert was pretty clear pretty quick that he was not. And then the next level, so the expertise to secure operational technology and SCADA is very rare. We're at TI Safe. This is one of the only organizations I know of that has that core focus, right? So that's a pretty rare thing to see when we talk about real-world implications, plus the idea that it's a very hard to find. So that's why I put Homer Simpson there. Most of the SCADA operators I met were very similar to Homer, so eating a lot of donuts. So that being said, the implications are drastic, right? So when we get right into it, a high-level overview of what I'm talking about is really, we've always been in this segment, right? We've always had nuclear plants and chemical and petrochemical and all these other things that are being managed by computers. But recently, the left hand of that diagram is starting to show up. And that really is where the problem exists, right? So we have all these connected devices. Everyone who wants to use their phone to control their garage door opener and whatever it is, right? But there's gaps, and that's why in between each one of those, there's a big gap, because there's something missing. There's almost always something missing. There's, the PLC doesn't like secure communications, or you can't install an endpoint on the servers, right? The human-machine interface is very, very simple. I don't know if you guys remember back in the summer. I guess it was November of sometime last year. The island of Hawaii got a bomb scare, right, from North Korea. That was because the human interface was designed so poorly that it was possible to click, instead of all is good, it's we're all going to die, right? So that's a big problem when we talk about human interfaces, securing the website, credential management. All those things are tricky when it comes to operational technology. The first example, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the first times that I was exposed, really at a pretty young age, to the Aurora vulnerability. So this was taking place at the Idaho National Laboratory, and which is where I spent a good chunk of my time. And basically, it was a demonstration of how using a traditional attack, right? So a traditional, whether it was at the time Metasploit or Kali Linux or whatever you want to call it, pretty traditional standard attack that we see all the time, mixed with the fact that the computer that was attached to the generator, so this was a nuclear generator, right? So it provides clean, consistent power for the nuclear process. It was disconnected at the time, obviously. It was easy enough to write a script that controlled some variables that sent information to the generator. It interrupted the cycles in the motor, and eventually the motor, because there's such high horsepower, such high displacement, turning it on and off and on and off got the motor out of phase. And what that meant was the pistons were firing when they shouldn't, and bad things happened, and the whole building actually had to be torn down after the generator failed. So I know that because my father actually worked at the laboratory at the time in the construction zone, so he actually had to tear it all down after it blew up. So that was kind of fun. Well, not for him. But the idea is, if this was connected to a real nuclear generator, right, a nuclear fusion reactor, this would have caused the secondary generator to go online, and maybe the tertiary, right? So if they had 3 of these. But what if all 3 of those were vulnerable to the same vulnerability simultaneously, right? One spins up, we blow it up, we blow it up. Then you have a core meltdown, and that could really mean loss of life, right? Think Chernobyl, think Fukushima, all these terrible things that have happened on accident now could be done on purpose. So that's scary enough. Example number 2 is something that I researched for a couple months. I was really pretty enamored with this one as far as how it happened, what happened, and some of the motivations, because there really didn't seem to be a lot of motivation to do this. So they didn't demand money. They basically just wanted to mess with a bunch of people in Ukraine, right? So what happened was hackers leveraged, once again, pretty traditional means of compromise to infiltrate and take over 3 electric power companies in the Ukraine, responsible for roughly 225 to 250,000 customers, right? So that's a lot of people, right? That's more than live in my hometown in Idaho. So that's quite a bit of people to be without power in the dead of winter in Ukraine, right? So it was probably pretty scary for them. The interesting part about this whole attack was the way the hackers knew which industrial controls were being used at each one of these obligeros, they call them. They were touted in the newspaper. They're saying, look at Ukraine, we're doing so well. Look at these investments we've made in our power grid. Look at these investments we're making in our services that we provide to our people. We're doing great. In doing so, they told everyone which model, which system they were using. The hackers simply downloaded the manual and started reading through it. Oh, well, we can do this, we can do that. We can turn it all on and off by this simple workstation. And they had a pretty good idea that that workstation could be exploitable. So they started totally traditional, right? So if you start in the upper section of the graph there, so they started with a spear phishing email. Hundreds of millions of these go out every day. Everybody gets spear phished, right? They got in, they were able to steal the credentials of the person that clicked on the link. They were able to generate everything from remote access to getting workstation remote control through a VPN. So remote access tools were downloaded. There was no endpoint protection. Or I want to say there was, but it was completely turned off. So because it was slowing everything down, I guess. I'm not sure. So from there, they had full access, right? They had all the credentials they needed, and they had full, unabridged, encrypted access to the box. So then they went about doing what they wanted to do. So they went ahead and started controlling the devices. And they did more than just interrupting and turning things off. They actually severed the connection between the servers and the actual PLCs. So they made that interface that connects directly to the grid unusable. They actually ruined the firmware so that the company couldn't even get it back up. It would take a new product to actually make that work again. Actually, to this day, they didn't even fix it. They just went back to the way they were. So they actually severed the communications. They prevented people from even fixing without doing a manual reset of the switches. And then from there, they did something that was probably unnecessary and kind of probably super frustrating. So they knew that as soon as the power went out in the middle of the winter in the Ukraine, they were going to get phone calls. Phone calls and phone calls and phone calls. So they DDoSed the call centers. So now the call center couldn't even take a call. So the obligeros, the energy companies, they didn't even know there was an outage for hours because they weren't getting any calls, so everything's great, right? So that's a huge problem. No money exchanged hands. They just ruined a bunch of stuff for a bunch of people. It's a very strange event, if you ask me, and it's one of those things that really exemplifies the idea that this is possible and it could be done for no money, right? There's just people want to do this stuff for some reason. So that's a huge problem, right? Pretty upsetting. So when I moved, it's been kind of interesting. So when I went from the Idaho National Lab to Blue Coat to Symantec, the one thing that hasn't changed really is my role. I've always been in control or not in control, but selling and representing our security analytics platform. And one thing we do is we can deliver real-time comprehensive threat information on SCADA, IoT, OT, basically all forms of network communication we can report on. And we do it very well, right? So we can do it at line speeds. We'll get into that. One thing we do great, and this is something that I've always been kind of fascinated by, is the idea of the network forensics and the network malware detection. So we're not on the endpoint. We're wholly passive off of a TAP or a SPAN or any of those types of tools. And from that, capturing all those packets, we leverage threat intelligence, our deep packet inspection engine, and our malware analysis tool to help kind of understand what's on the network without having to be on the endpoint, right? Because on the endpoints, you can lie. You can lie about directories. You can lie about logs. You can lie about program names. You can hide things. You can clean up the logs after the fact. But because we're passive, you can't lie to us. We're seeing all the packets in real time, and we're collecting everything, right? So what that gives us is a unique opportunity to parse SCADA networks. So we take all of the regular network controls that you would expect, right? Your IT, your web pages, your everything, right? Mail, all the regular IT infrastructure, and then we added in the top another layer of detection of SCADA. So we have DMP3 and Modbus, Ethernet packet capture, as well as this notion that if you have a tool that doesn't necessarily fit inside of the bounds of what our deep packet inspection engine can currently do, we can write a custom parsing engine for it. And it adds little to no overhead when you're actually detecting that, that protocol. So it gives you a nice, easy way to go from having the same tool exist on one side of your network, right? And then you have your operational technology that can actually, correlate that information to see what happened and when, right? So very cool. Lastly, and you guys probably saw this in the lab, which is great, is our ICS USB protection device. I just got a text message from my boss who helps run this stuff, and he actually came from the Norman Shark acquisition of Blue Coat, who developed this. We have a new one, a new one that's coming out, and it's a simple box about this big. You plug your USB into it, and it tells you all the things you need to know on a monitor. So it's fantastic. I couldn't get it into the slideshow fast enough, so we'll just have to take my word for it. But we're actively developing this to be more powerful, more useful, more integrated into the Symantec security stack. But basically what it does is it tests all of your removable media to make sure you're not plugging in a big pile of malware into your ICS devices, which is great. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. When we break down the solutions, the one that I'm probably most familiar with and the one that I'm most, proud of, if you want to say, or most passionate about, is security analytics, for sure. So it is your full fidelity packet. So we can capture up to 10 gigabits per second on a single box. If you have faster networks than that, we can do parallel deployments where we can capture up to 100 gigabits per second in a single instance. You can attach up to 1.5 petabytes of data per sensor. So you can get a lot of traffic and keep that traffic for as long as you need it to do the analysis you need. We have SCADA protocol visibility that I've mentioned a couple times already, and then the custom protocol. So being able to write your own parsers is a really flexible aspect of this tool, and it really helps in terms of understanding what's on your network. Anomaly detection. It makes sense. We're right there. We're capturing all the packets. We have all the data. We have all the metadata. We have the timing. We have the counts. We have the size. We have all the things you need to do anomaly detection. So it makes sense that we do it on this box, right? So that's awesome. That's been around for about a year and a half, and it's developing every time we make a new release. We're making it better and better and better, which is great. And then data enrichment. Lastly, the one thing I don't talk about too much in this particular presentation is the fact that the security analytics platform is wide open. From an API perspective, from a development platform, you can do a lot of things. So if you already have great tools, like all the vendors in there, all of your typical securities tools and that stack, they can work together, and they can work with security analytics. So they do a good job of IDS, for instance, right? Sometimes IDS signatures can pop on a single packet, right? Well, that tells you what that one packet was about, which is fine. But if you pivot into security analytics, because we have full fidelity now, you can see what happened before, so leading up to that packet, what happened during, what that looked like, that compromise, if you will, and then what happened afterwards, right? So you get a full scope, full context of what happened for that moment of time that your other tools that are still great showed you. So that's a huge, that's really what I sell it on. When I talk to customers, when I talk to my partners in the industry, the biggest thing is knowing what something looks like helps you find that needle in the needle stack, right? And it's kind of interesting because we had I don't know if you guys saw, we had the box of keys at the table over there where you could unlock the lock. Well, I just spent a minute and I looked through all the keys, and it's pretty easy to find the actual key it is. If you just take some time and you have all the keys and you know which ones they look like. So unfortunately, I don't win the camera because they can't give it to me. And so one of you guys can go win it. I'll tell you which key it is. So the malware analysis appliance is another great tool. This was an acquisition from Norman Shark, and it was purpose-built to do sandboxing. And it doesn't, unlike any other sandboxing solution in the world. So we have a hybrid solution. So we both do your typical sandboxing, detonating, right? Seeing what the packet does, combing through all the code and seeing what, registry errors and all that stuff that are created. But another thing we do that's really great is allow you to have a custom environment. So you can have multiple custom environments where it looks just like your ICS control station, or just like your accounting team, or just like your cybersecurity platform, right? Whatever your golden image is, you can put it on that box, make it look exactly relevant to your organization, and then detonate against that. So you know if there is malware and it was seen, it was relevant to you, right? Because you can even put your endpoint providers on that box, which is fantastic. So couple that with security analytics, and what happens if something comes in, and we'll talk about the threat intelligence in a minute. If something comes in and we don't know what it is, whether it's good or bad, then what we'll do is we'll send it to malware analysis for detonation automatically. There's no user input. It goes to malware analysis. It comes back up into security analytics with a determination, good, bad, ugly, whatever. And we go from there, and then you use that information. The next time it's seen, if it's the same project, same product, same executable, whatever, we won't bother. We already have the information we need. So we're able to get that information quickly and relevantly to whatever log collection device you guys use or any of those other solutions, right? So this is all driven by the Symantec intelligence services. And this is huge. So if you think about the marriage between Blue Coat and Symantec, is they did pretty different things, right? We had very little overlap in products, which is fantastic when you kind of merge together. So what that gave us was Blue Coat, on the one hand, is the world's leading proxy solution provider, right? 300 million endpoints. We see roughly anywhere from 1 to 4 billion unique requests per day. And we content and categorize the entire internet multiple times per day. Right? So you think about the power of having that many users using one solution, being able to categorize the internet. And take a look at all that from a threat perspective, right? Is huge. So we've always done a great job at that at Blue Coat. And Symantec has been a leader in the threat prevention and threat anomaly detection and threat just everything, right? Malware analysis, all those things for years. They have a large team doing it, and it's a near constant process. So we took both of those and we blended them together. And it happened in the first week of the companies being together. So that was obviously a critical focus for both companies, which was fantastic. And it works out great because a lot of our products use those solutions simultaneously. So security analytics leverages it, malware analysis leverages it, my SSL platform that I mentioned before, it does that. Our DLP, our CASB, all of our solutions basically leverage the intelligence services. So it's a fantastic solution for knowing about that. And the coolest part is, because Blue Coat already had a focus for the operational technologies, we added those into the device, right? So, or into the secure intelligence services when we became one. So now, not only are we protecting against regular network attacks, we also have the operational technology as well, which is fantastic. When we talk about, I kind of mentioned this, but the fact that security analytics lives passively, right? So we monitor the whole network out of band. So there's my SSL, right? There's my SSL visibility. And this is great because this is a good conversation starter for most people is, what are you doing with your encrypted traffic? A couple years ago, I'd say, you're missing 20, 30% of your network traffic. And now, lately, I've been having the conversation of, you're missing 60 to 70, 80, maybe 100% of your network traffic is encrypted. So it's a major problem, right? So we want to go ahead and use SSL visibility to feed not only security analytics, not only does it feed just our stuff, you can feed all of your tools. So it's a really high return on investment tool for you to use in your environment, which is great. Security analytics hangs separately, right? So we have a passive feed, we're out of band, right? We're not in the flow of traffic. We collect everything, we do all this analysis that I've been talking about, and including the SCADA stuff, which is fantastic. And so that gives us the ability to take multiple feeds. So not only can we collect from the SSL, we can collect from your firewall or your other taps or wherever else in the network that you have network feeds coming from. You can put those into security analytics, and we can kind of coalesce all that data into one solution, which is great. So I kind of mentioned before, using security analytics and malware analysis as a team, right? They do it automatically, so you can automatically detonate new stuff, which is exciting. And it gives you the ability to kind of be prepared before you even needed to know you needed to be prepared, right? Which is great. When we talk about the attributes that we index for security analytics, this is a screenshot of just the SCADA section of our DPI, so our Deep Packet Inspection Engine. And if you look, there's a lot of stuff, right? So there's a lot of DMP3, a lot of different variables that get indexed, and a lot of Modbus variables as well. So what this gives you is the flexibility to know that if it's an attribute that that is in the right construct for these protocols, we'll find it, and we'll pull it out of the packets in real time. And you can use this alongside all of the other categories to see that data, right? So you can look for a SCADA attribute that's out of bounds, and then look at what applications are leveraging that particular traffic, right? So you can do a lot of really neat correlation between your IT and your OT, which is always helpful when you have those interactions. So that's strong. And then what this doesn't represent is what this doesn't show you is the custom analytics, right? So what it does is if you have some custom application or some custom service that's being provided, we can create a parsing engine that allows you to see that traffic now right alongside of all this other stuff. So you have the power to have literally everything on your network indexed and analyzed and correlated and searchable by your analysts. So if something does happen, you can either know about it right away, or if one of your other tools alerts you, or you find it from your SIM tool or your logging device, whatever it is, you can end up in security analytics and see what happened before, during, and after. When we talk about finding bad stuff, that's always on the tip of our tongue. Is I want the tool to show me the bad stuff, right? And that's exactly what malware analysis does. So not only can we load whatever applications you like into those devices, we can also analyze those on our side from a threat perspective. So we give the analyst all the tools they need to see what the actual artifact or the executable, the script, whatever it is, however it looks and what it does is visible in malware analysis. And all this information, all of this here, this all gets piped back into our global intelligence network. So the next time it's seen, you're already aware of it. So that's really helpful when you're looking for something, and you don't want to keep looking for the same thing over and over again, right? You saw this earlier. We kind of talked about it, and this is being kind of developed as we speak, which is fantastic. So it's our ICS protection scanning station. This is a really cool tool that I was kind of surprised when Norman Shark and Bluecoat and Security Analytics, Solera at the time, we all got together. This was something I wasn't expecting. I didn't know about this, but it's really pretty neat. So basically, you start here, right? You saw it in the office, and you scan your USB, right? And you can actually do some really pretty neat things with the telemetry that you can add to the USB. Is it'll actually not allow any execution of anything. It won't even accept the device if the endpoint agent is being ran on one of the control servers. So if you scan it with a device and you tell it to more or less encrypt the device, so it's not encryption per se, but that's probably the easiest analogy, is you can't take that and plug it into something unless the endpoint host agent is running, and it actually activates that kernel. So very cool way to prevent something that hasn't been scanned from being put onto a system that has real ICS implications, right? So anyway, you take your USB, you scan it, it's clear, it's good, you're good to go. You can enter it into either the workstation or the HMI computer, and then from there, obviously, they do whatever associated task is for those devices. So that's probably one of the neatest tools we have, and immediately impactful, right? You know that you can add this to your policy really quickly. You can get this into your system and your organization quickly, but it's also it's kind of a stopgap, right? So that's one vector for attack. Neither of the vulnerabilities that I discussed earlier used this type of attack. There was no USB for the Aurora vulnerability or for the Ukraine event. So that kind of brings me to the next point, which is really the strongest thing we have is something that we typically give away, right? So it's our intelligence services. It's something that we license for a lot of our products. It's built in at the core of what a lot of our stuff does, and from that, it's really amazingly effective. So we say we're blocking 99.99%, but really, if it's known and the tools are set up in a blocking fashion, it'll block everything. right? So 99.99 is probably something the legal team put in there, right? So it's one of those deals that there's always a chance, I suppose. But the idea is you get up to the minute threat intelligence, and that can be up to the second. You could update this device as often as possible if you wanted, right? And the whole suite of tools, right, flows with it. And this is just the stuff that was brought over from Blue Coat, right? This doesn't show the DLP or SEP Mobile or any of our web isolation tools or any of those other great products. Because one thing that surprised me is how many things Symantec actually sells. We have a lot of products, and they all leverage the intelligence services, which is really cool, right? So this is trusted by 150,000 different operations globally, 70% of the Global 500. It's a lot. So we have a lot of big name customers. We have a lot of mid-tier. We have a lot of small guys as well, right? A lot of people use SEP, Norton. But we're leveraging the Blue Coat K9 service. If you guys know what that is, it's kind of like a proxy for your kids, for your iPads and tablets and all that stuff. That uses the intelligence services. I had an interesting stat that I want to say it was over 70% of new malware is found via the K9 app, because you have kids going all over on the internet doing whatever. My mom, right, getting on the internet and just trying to destroy her computer, it seems like. But that being said, we run everything we see in the intelligence network on a live basis. We run it through over 200 different threat analytics engines, or 55 supported languages. And I actually checked, and Portuguese is one of the supported languages. So it's better at Portuguese than I am, which is pretty easy. But that being said, it's definitely the backbone of what our tool is capable of. It gives you that threat intelligence information that you need to make good decisions right away. When we focus on the future, I think there's probably two ways to look at it: what's good about it and what's bad about it. So we'll start with the bad. The bad is ransomware, which has been a huge problem lately. It's been around for a while, but it's been a big problem, right? WannaCry was terrible, had a huge impact on a lot of places. It's inevitably going to focus on control systems. We're going to see a ransomware take over an electric company or my hometown water treatment facility, because they are woefully unprepared, I found out. But the good news is, of all of the customers that Symantec has, all of them that had up-to-date definitions and had their systems turned on and enabled properly, they were protected from WannaCry. Right? So we did very, very good. We actually did the 99.5 or something like that % of our customers were not impacted by the WannaCry event, which is huge for us. We were definitely a leader in that perspective. This is good or bad. Right? When you think about the Internet of Things and the fact that I could turn off all the lights off in my house and my wife would have no idea what's going on because it's the middle of the day, and I could open the garage doors, I could turn on the alarm, I could turn off all the cameras, I could do all sorts of stuff from my phone. It's pushing a whole industry to make these decisions of, do I want a connected cat box? Do I want a connected, whatever? All these things are pressuring this industry to make real-world affections happen virtually, which is kind of interesting. And I don't think a lot of those companies are paying attention to the security of those devices. We have some companies, but really around my house, I obviously have security analytics installed at my home. A lot of the communications between my internet-connected things, like I was able to actually inject some code into my sprinkler system and turn on my sprinklers pretty easily, right? So unencrypted solutions that are lacking any kind of protection. So this is what's driving this industry. So if it becomes commonplace at home, I think it's going to become more commonplace in the industry to say, well, I can turn off my water at home. Why can't I do it at the water treatment facility? Well, maybe you shouldn't, right? So the lack of cyber skills is deepening. We're seeing this all over the board. Symantec, I know personally from my boss and from conversations I've had, I'm sure Marcos can attest, is it's hard to find qualified cybersecurity professionals, right? We have to either babysit them all the way through college and then hope they choose us, or find the guys that maybe aren't as good and maybe need some coaching. So it's hard to find cybersecurity professionals. And then on top of that, finding the SCADA-centric cybersecurity professionals is even more hard. There's a bunch of homers out there, right? So the good news is conferences like this are why I'm here. I came all the way from America, right? It was 24 hours of travel to be here to talk to you guys in a language you don't understand so that I can stress how important these conferences are. Take this information, maybe not what I said, whatever else you learned throughout the last week, take it back to your organizations and do something with it. Right? Make a plan, make a process, and just make it happen. Because it's going to take people like us in this room, people like TI Safe, to get this message out there. Because it's not happening fast. It's never been happening fast enough. It couldn't happen fast enough. Now it should have happened yesterday. So that's okay. We're here, we're making it happen, and things are rolling. So I think we're at an interesting inflection point in the market, right? So we're starting to see more people care. I really believe that, right? We're starting to see other solutions that have been out of the operational technology space suddenly say, oh, well, if you're going to connect all this stuff, we might as well help you with it. So we're starting to see a shift. We're starting to see a shift in the idea that the manufacturers are paying attention. They're finally encrypting the communications. They're finally, adding safety controls. Big shocker. And that helps us get to a place where we're at where we would expect all of our security devices. If you bought a server from, let's just say, Dell, and there were no security measures in place, you would send it back. But for some of our stuff, like oil and gas pipeline controls, nuclear facilities, they don't have a choice. There are no new solutions. So we have to use what's available, and typically they're woefully unprepared, which is not good. So we're seeing a lot of good movement in the industry. We're seeing a lot of good things happening. And I think ultimately it can only get more awareness. Even if it takes something bad happening, I'd hate for that to happen. Right? I don't want to see a dam breached or a whole electrical grid ruined. But if that happens, we'll finally have the visibility we need to maybe do something about it, hopefully. So that being said, I think that's the end of my presentation. So if do we do questions? I didn't really ask. I just assumed we could do questions. So, but either that, just wrap it up. So good. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you.